Trump's open refusal so far to accept the results of the election has led to a lot of lower-level Republicans echoing some of the common Republican attacks on voting rights, usually under the guise of concerns over voter fraud. The sorts of charges that at one point were true in some cases. There were elections that were thrown by dead people voting and those sorts of things. They just have been decades and decades and decades ago at this point. And the sort of rhetoric now is a little bit more focused on trying to disenfranchise people from across the country wherever possible. In this particular case, we've got Chris Kobach, the current Kansas Secretary of State, who said this: "I think there's no question that the number of aliens registered to vote in Florida is probably in the tens of thousands, and the number voting is probably going to be in the thousands. So I think there's a very real risk that a battleground state could be decided by non-citizens voting."
You know what these people never provide when they make these accusations? A single shred of evidence.
Not at all.
Because it doesn't exist. And you have Rudy Giuliani, that despicable human being, on television everywhere saying that, of course, this is a huge problem. And I had this huge problem in New York. It's like, hey, man, you were the district attorney. You were the prosecutor. Yeah. You didn't prosecute a single case of voter fraud. So either you're lying or you sucked as a prosecutor.
You sucked. You're lazy.
Or both.
Probably
They're not
both.
mutually exclusive.
I would guess both.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, the fall of Rudy Giuliani has been one of the saddest things of the past 15 years.
Particularly because he wasn't that high up to begin with, and he's still falling
That's true.
far.
But there was a time when the country admired him a little bit.
Yeah.
Perhaps without much cause, but a little bit of cause. I think that you really hit on it right there. It's the fact that he doesn't care about evidence, or he won't use evidence. The people who support him and the Republican Party don't require evidence. And the media, even where they try to check this sort of thing, is ineffective in forcing evidence to be what determines how we respond to charges like this. And whether it's issues of supposed voter fraud by illegal immigrants or people who are dead or whatever, whether it's the claim that those on welfare are spending all the money on drugs, whether it has to do with climate change. I mean, all of these are topics that science doesn't just theoretically have something to say about, but that studies have already weighed on and made clear that you're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to have a vote be fraudulently cast in a federal election. There are something like 31 cases over the past 2 decades or so. And obviously the 97% of scientists who agree on climate change. All of these things we have more than enough evidence on, but too high a percentage of the American people just fundamentally don't care about. And there's half of the electoral process, at least the politicians on the right, who are telling them constantly to not just not require evidence, but to doubt it at all turns.
And they were throwing around the number last night that 4.5 million dead people are on the rolls. Well, they're not going to vote because they're dead.
Because they're dead.
And there's no evidence that people are using those names to vote. The only case they could come up with was a guy named John Smith Jr., who was mistakenly checked in as his late father, John Smith Sr.
Yeah.
Wasn't John Smith, it was another guy named John Smith.
Exactly, and that through the election, right?
Right, totally.
Totally through the election, always does. When SNL isn't rigging elections, as Donald Trump made clear on Twitter. And so look, this guy, Chris Kobach, he's a bad guy. He's Secretary of State, which is, when it comes to elections, that's an extremely important position. Now, understand that secretaries of state are, in most cases, appointed by the governor in their respective state. And so when you're considering the possibility that the entire presidential election will be rigged, understand that 33 states right now have Republican governors. Marco Rubio, by the way, not a totally responsible guy, but in this particular case, did come out in a responsible way about the rigging of elections. And so we want to give him credit by showing you video 5 here.
Not being rigged. And I'm explaining to you why it's not being rigged in Florida and why I hope he stops saying that. Why he should stop saying that. We have 67 counties in this state, each of which conduct their own elections. I promise you there is not a 67 county conspiracy to rig this election. Second, the governor of the state of Florida is a Republican who appoints the people that run the division of elections. Third, there's no evidence behind any of this. And so this should not continue to be said. This is a state that literally has millions of people who came here because they couldn't vote in the nation of their birth. It would be a tragedy if they gave up their vote here as well.
He used the word evidence, and so he won me over there.
Yeah, no,
he at least used the word.
When Marco Rubio, he's the good guy all of a sudden. That's how crazy we've gotten.
Yeah. That is a scary position to be in, because Marco Rubio, remember, is a crazy. He is an extreme right winger. He just looks rational in comparison to people like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. And again, look. Chris Kobach, we're going to show you a little bit later on. He's the guy behind Crosscheck, this system that supposedly is intended to stop voter fraud, but is actually intended to disenfranchise voters. And so that his influence is no longer just restricted to occasional appearances in the media and whatever he's able to do in Kansas, which, considering the voter demographics in Kansas, it doesn't really matter. That has now infiltrated dozens of states, and the frustration that I have is the throwing around of the word rig, which, like shill, no longer means anything. There are ways that the system is rigged. We talked earlier in the show about money in politics, the advantages that incumbents have. The media can have a strong effect on elections. The fact that we have a first-past-the-post voter system literally rigs the system against third parties. Right. Those are real ways that the system is rigged. It isn't rigged by illegal immigrants, and it isn't rigged by zombies. And the people who believe that, they're missing a chance to have a positive impact on the system, to move it in the direction that it needs to be moved.
The whole 2-hour podcast of the Young Turks,
you're going to get it
if you become a member. TYTnetwork.com/join.